in slideshow mode. So this talk is going to be a little different from some of the other ones you heard. This is not a technical talk as such. It is what we decided to do, my colleagues at Illuminate and I, we are technical people, but we invest in startups. And I'm going to describe a little bit about our program. Then I'm going to show you all the different businesses that have sprung out of the various optical technologies. And I have more slides than I can cover, so I'm going to just zing through them, and then people have questions they can ask me at the end. So what are we? We are Illuminate, and Illuminate is the world's largest and only completely OPI-focused accelerator and investment fund for startups. Together, that combination is very unique. And that's what we do. We pick early stage optical companies, and we invest in them, and we teach them how to grow their business. So there are some very specific issues when you're trying to grow a business in the optics industry, in the optics, photonics, or imaging. It's a pretty comprehensive industry. Number one, OPI manufacturing is capital intensive. So most companies need to do some amount of contract manufacturing or something until they have enough volume to be able to build out a factory, because factories are expensive. Significant direct headcount is really from large companies. In the beginning, you're only going to have a few people, and so you have to figure out how to best hire who those people should be, because you only have so much money. Hiring is tricky right now, and worldwide, it's hard to get the right people. There are more jobs than there are people in our industry. And finally, optics, photonics, and industry is an interdisciplinary industry where other supply chain critical disciplines like semiconductor, quantum, all of them, they have a lot of interplay. So you can't work in isolation. It's not a software app, which you can just hire software developers and off you go. You're going to work with the industry. So what does Illuminate do? We take the best early stage innovations, best early stage businesses, and we help bring them in to establish connections. We give them expert guidance from industry mentors and optics, photonics, and imaging focused curriculum for growing their business. This is a US organization, so we give them access to the US supply chain and universities, but this model can be made international. And we take companies from all over the world. So I should say it is an international program that we recruit internationally. And then we finally get them out the door with some funding so they can have scalable products into markets and have growing businesses. So I'm not going to go into horrible detail in these slides because I don't want to bore everybody, but you can ask me questions too. But the way it works is we take applicants from all over the world. We take 10 companies into the program per year. We give them a $100,000 initial investment. $50,000 needs to be spent in our region because we're going to work with them on it. We give them grant support. We introduce them to other investment funds. We do a lot of diligence with them, which makes them investable to other organizations. And then we do some follow-on funding to some of the companies up to about $2 million. In terms of resources, we give them 3 to 4 advisory board mentors from industry execs that really know what they're doing. We have laboratory resources. We give them office space. We give them access to the New York Photonics cluster, and we help them with contract manufacturing. In terms of content of what we give them programming, like class programming, and most of it's online. Building a diligence folder, which is what investors look at when they want to figure out what they can invest in you. We teach them marketing, sales, finance, supply chain. We introduce them to over 35 investors. We give them 50 seminars, about 200 hours of it. And we work with industry standard programs. After we invest in a company and we've taught them everything, we continue to support them. We are hands-on investment managers. We do follow-on funding. We have strong ties to industry associations like Optica, SPIE, IEEE. And we help with site and staffing. We are a not-for-profit. So unlike other venture funds, if you do really well and we've invested in you, all that money just goes out to invest in other companies. Our goal is none of us get personally wealthy off it. It's really done to in comes and out goes to other companies. So what have we done so far? We've taken about 600 applications in 27 different countries. 54 companies have been in our program. That 22 DEI is diversity, equity, inclusion is because we are looking to support all types of CEOs and women and minorities and people with differently abled. We want people not to feel like they can't apply to us. Of the 54 companies over the last 5 years that we worked with, 51 are still operating. 3 did not function, so that's actually, but they were not our bigger investments. The financial worth of the companies to date, when they come in, they're worth like 1 or 2 million. So I would say initial investment state, there would have been about 50 million. At this 50 to 100 million, but their combined worth after going through the program is somewhere around 400 million. We have an investment ratio, which we've put in about 11 to 12 million. Outside investors and agencies have put in about 83 million. So that puts us around a 7-to-1 match in money. In terms of jobs, we've created 309 worldwide, 105 in New York, and we have 45 open positions we're trying to fill. So what type of technologies do we invest in? We look at sensors and integrated photonics. We look at multispectral imaging, camera capture image processing. We look at materials, metrology, and at light sources. Some of the types of market segments that come out of the technologies that we invest in are in security and communications for like quantum, LiDAR, free space communications and encryption. In the energy and agriculture business, we're taking companies that are doing solar and hydropower, greenhouse glass, soil productivity and monitoring, that's sensors. In AR, VR display, we take 360 cameras, display materials, camera, cell phones, things, applications. And medtech and pharma, it's ophthalmology, cardiology, remote patient, wound care, pharma. All of these things are optics, photonics, and imaging companies as their core technology. So I'm going to go through, and what I'm going to do now is I am going to walk through various, this is not a comprehensive look at every company in our portfolio, but some of the different companies that we have. And I'm going to talk about what they do a little bit. So in the area of materials, I'm going to highlight 3 different companies that we've invested. We have Mosaic Microsystems, which does a method for glass-based interposers and handling of ultra-thin glass. This is really important for processing for 5G applications. So they developed a very basic carrying and handling and metallization, sort of our interposers for glass, which becomes critical to phone companies and 5G companies everywhere. But fundamentally, it's glass handling and glass materials. We also invest in Sun Density. It does a photonic smart coating and nano coating for solar cells that increases their efficiency significantly, which everybody knows in solar, it's all about increasing efficiency. We also picked up a company out of, so Mosaic was a New York company. Sun Density came out of Massachusetts, as did Mesodyne. Mesodyne makes a nanophotonic material, which is engineered to deliver light when heated. So this light drives PV cells and that generates electricity. So basically they can do energy conversion and energy storage. It's a very basic idea, but it gives you portable energy, which is very, very critical. Some of the examples of where microscopy is used is double helix, and I'll show you a better slide of this stuff. We call it light engineering technology, which provides in-depth resolution in a near-field imaging. So they are using phase gratings and 3D reconstruction to really take a look at a nanoscale of what's happening in a real-time 3D reconstruction, which allows industries like pharma to really understand what drug development looks like. Whereas pharma is typically an outcome-based industry, you know, the drugs are fed, the outcomes measured. This kind of gives you a far more very clear look at what is happening. We also invested in Augmentix. Augmentix is basically an attachment to a standard digital pathology microscope, which allows a lot more cataloging and detailed understanding of the pathology. And this company's out of Israel. Double Helix is out of Boulder, Colorado. It's a simple add-on to a pathology microscope. It makes their lives so much easier. We also have a company called Xprimary, which is advanced bioanalysis, and they use low-cost bioanalytical instruments and assay kit consumables. They build the consumables and they use optical readout systems, which are much better than what is typically out in the industry, to really understand and do basic lab processing. But this is a really critical need in bioanalysis, in genetics, because when most companies have to do this kind of analysis, particularly of a hospital or so on-site, they have to send the test out to be done somewhere, and so it's weeks in the cycle time, but they've made it cost effective and easy for somebody to do on site, which really changes how analysis is done both in the research environment but ultimately in drug delivery and in treatment. This is a kind of more detailed look at what double helix does, and it shows you why it's so important, how optics is so important in drug development and diagnostic testing. So if you look at the picture on the left in each one of these paired images, you see what double helix sees, which is it's an attachment to a microscope too, so you don't have to buy a horribly expensive instrument. On the right, you see the image as we look at it through a standard 2-dimensional microscope. On the left, you see far more detail, and you get axial depth, and you get knowledge. The color coding is axial depth and knowledge. which really makes you understand better what you're seeing. So you have unprecedented axial precision and a really good depth of field. And you don't have to keep refocusing. So typically you had to be a shoot, refocus, and then try to reconstruct it. On the far right, you see a complete redetailed structure of a HeLa cell. So HeLa cells being one of the ultimate tools of research, if you can see this level of detail at the HeLa cell level in real time, you could actually do drug development diagnostic testing real time and understand much, much better what's happening. And this is a basic optical instrument. And here's where we can take our knowledge of optics and really improve an industry. In the AR/VR space, we have a bunch of different investments, but I'm going to specifically talk to you about circle optics and bounce imaging. Circle optics is a 360 camera that does not require any stitching. And typically when you think about panoramic imaging and image capture, the delay and the heaviness in the data has to do with the image processing. And a lot of that comes from parallax error. So if you can get around the parallax error and capture immediately without having to stitch and without having to do heavy image processing, you suddenly have the ability to be immersive very quickly. The first and current application is on drones, which is really for various industrial and defense applications. But ultimately, one can imagine at the correct cost point that this is the ultimate consumer. You could be in the metaverse. Everyone can, and you can transmit your own metaverse. So this is actually kind of an exciting area of development. Another area we looked at in AR/VR, we have a solid investment is in bounce imaging. They do tactical throwable cameras. So this is a camera that does a 360 image in very difficult circumstances, like in fires and nasty image environments, but it's a 360 camera that can capture really well. It's noise resistant, and it has the stabilized panoramic video processing, which is really important because when you throw this camera is basically a ball, and it's flung through a window in a burning building, or in some very difficult situations. Say firefighters need to know if there's people in the building that need rescuing and where are they, or if you're in a military or terrorist action and you need to know where the people are, where the enemy is, and who's really an enemy and who's a hostage. You don't want to just go in there guns blazing and do something terrible. So you throw this camera in there so you can understand what you're walking into. Its first use is really like for firefighters, but it basically gives really clean eyes to what's happening in difficult to image environments in a 360 way. We also have a couple of LiDAR investments. Again, these are not all of our investments. I'm just highlighting a few. In the LiDAR, and I use that phrase kind of loosely because not all of these are LiDAR. We have a company called Preact, which does a software definable flash LiDAR, but they're basically doing is object detection. And not all LiDAR is used for, oh, I'm going to put it in my car and it's going to be good for car. I mean, although this one is in a car. You can imagine the car has other things they have to look at. They have to look at where the curb is when you park. Do you want to open the door and take out a bicyclist? Or there are many different types of object recognition, which are really, really critical in every day. Another example that Preact can use is if they're approaching a collision, there's like 3 stages of collision. I see a collision, there's collision avoidance. It's like, I don't want to be in that accident, and something helps me get out of it. And we see a lot of like braking technologies and things like that. There's the type of collision technology like airbags. Like you've hit the object, now let's deploy every airbag so no one gets hurt. But there's also an in-between state for companies like Preact where they can detect the oncoming impact, but they don't necessarily have time to avoid the impact, but they can adjust the vehicle to minimize the impact even before the airbags go off. Maybe they push the seat back so the steering wheel is not right there. There's things that the vehicle can quickly adjust to ensure that the impact of collision is not so terrible. Our Autonomous is also in this space, and they do monocular 3D ranging, and they can see night vision and things very, very well. And if you think about most pedestrian deaths and things in automotive collisions, so often it's at night, it's in dusk, it's an evening, it's a moving object when you can't see very well, and your standard camera can't see very well, and ours really can. So yes, they can also go after defense applications, but that's really kind of what their specialty is. Can we see things in difficult environments? And can your vehicle see things in difficult environments? But all of this boils down to very complicated cameras and image processing. In the world of sensors, we have a couple of different applications I want to point out. Neurescence has low-profile optical probes for neurological imaging. So they put these little tiny probes, this is primarily in mouse research, in multiple sections of the brain, of the mouse brain. And it is so lightweight and so accurate, it does not disable or immobilize the mouse. So the mouse could be running around doing whatever. And the reason that's so critical is in things like pharmaceutical research, and you want to really understand what the effect of certain pharmacology products are. You want to be able to measure multiple sections of the brain. You want neurological imaging to be location specific in different sectors of the brain. Typically, imaging right now is the whole brain or one spot. So they can see the 3 different areas and how they're interacting. And you also don't want the animal to be so disabled that they cannot move and they cannot do anything, because then you're losing a whole volume of information related to mobility and processing. So that's a really critical technology coming out of Canada. Think Outside comes out of Norway. And they do digital sensors for ice and water. Now, originally they had developed this technology to attach to skis because it would see under the snow and you could tell if an avalanche was likely. But they've actually moved their profile over to look at hydropower, snow melt and ice melts, particularly in the Nordics. That's a very important source of clean energy, but it is something that you have to know what the melt situation is going to be. Are you going to get more water or less water, and plan accordingly? So Think Outside's digital sensors are really critical. Currently in the hydropower industry, people have to hike up these snowy mountains, dig a hole, put a measurement pole down there and leave and come back and do that again. It's slow, it's dangerous, and it's sparse, right? Because you have to have somebody go up there periodically and do it, which is a non-easy ascent. But it's better if you could just drop a sensor and it tells you continuously. Third on this list from Denmark is Norditect, and they do a sensor that does farm soil analysis, which tells you what the chemical composition is for the farm soil, so you can understand how to adjust your fertilizer to give you the best crop yield. Again, this is an optical sensor and optical technology, so it puts agriculture right in the hands of the users, meaning that the farmer can decide right then and there. They don't have to wait 2 weeks for a test to understand what the right amount of fertilizer is. Right now, a big issue plaguing farmers is over-fertilization, because they can't over pesticides, dumping too many chemicals because they can't risk failure. It's expensive because they're dumping chemicals, and it's not really good for the environment either. So if we can do farm soil analysis, we can better understand what that agricultural need actually is and use just what we need. I'm going to show you some ophthalmology companies. Again, we have a lot of ophthalmology companies, so there's 4 of them, but we call them along the line of care. Lumedica Vision uses, I'm going to start in the beginning here. We're going to start with Intelon Optics. I'm sorry I'm going out of order. I'm going to kind of talk to you about it as if I was a patient. I'm having some kind of vision issue. I can go to Intelon Optics, and they will look at the biomechanical imaging of my eye structure. They'll look at the brilliance scattering and tell me if I have an eye disease or a serious problem. If I am in a country where maybe that's not so accessible, Lumedica Vision has a low-cost, handheld optical coherence tomography tool that allows an ophthalmologist or an optometrist to look at an eye and see if there's an eye disease problem in places where it's typically very difficult to afford. So now you know you have a problem. So then you can go and have it corrected. Not on this list is our company, Two Eyes Vision, which will help you kind of understand through AR what surgery is going to do for you, so you can decide if you want it or not. OVITS allows you to map the cornea, does an optical digital map of the cornea that allows us to cut for higher order aberrations contact lenses. Typically contact lenses, they're not the best for higher order aberrations. You just kind of have to live with it. And I'm one of those people who has higher order aberrations on my right eye. Without something like this, I will always see double. Custom contacts make all the difference, and OVITS's optical mapping allows it to be correct for my eye. And Acnatech out of Germany allows somebody who's had cataract surgery to go be looked at and have corrections done if the cataract surgery is not perfect. And this lens reviewer approach is really important because there's a lot of correction that comes post-cataract surgery, post-surgery for a lot of people. So these are different aspects of the point of care, which are all optical. There are some other medical devices I'm going to draw to your attention. Light Top Tech uses Gabor OCT to look for skin cancer, because it's a rapid, high-resolution image that uses biomimetic microscopes with this liquid lens technology that allows you to use this OCT methodology to look at a skin lesion and see, is it cancer and how deep is it? Because typically when you talk about skin cancer, if you have something that's concerning, you go to the surgeon and they cut off a slice and they check if it's cancerous, they cut off a little more, and they keep cutting until I finally get clean margins. Well, that's really painful for the patient who's getting cut after cut after cut. It's not really good for the doctor. It takes a long time, and also they don't get paid for past 2 cuts. They're not really making money either. Wouldn't it be better if you had an OCT image that said cut exactly this length and you're fine? So it's one cut and done. So that's what light top tech does. Dynacardia is a sensor and spectroscopy for better understanding blood pressure, particularly in the ICU. You don't want to use a cuff in the ICU if possible, because part of the problem is ICU needs continuous monitoring and needs to be very accurate. And you also don't want to further stress the patient. So this cuffless blood pressure monitor in the ICU allows ICU doctors and cardiologists and others to have a really clear understanding of what's happening with the patient at all times. Rubetection is an early bedsore detection. It's a spectroscopy tool that allows a nurse or a physician or a caregiver to kind of scan the patient and detect a bedsore early. And why this is so important is because a lot of people die at bedsores. I'm going to actually show you her in a little bit more detail. People don't realize how critical this is. By the time you see a bedsore, it's probably pretty deep and it can be very, very dangerous. And when you talk about people in nursing homes or who are paralyzed or who have something where it's not easy for them to be moving regularly, bedsores can develop. And in this time and age where healthcare professionals are overstressed, having to constantly watch and move people around, bedsores are a problem. But if you can see this coming ahead of time, you can go ahead and help them before it becomes a real crisis, and you can save a life. This also works for diabetic foot ulcers and other lesions that are indicative of something far more serious. If you can catch them earlier, it's really, really important. We really like this technology. And another interesting thing about this technology is that many of the methods of detecting bed sores right now is usually a nurse kind of presses and sees how fast it turns red or pink or whatever. That's very skin color dependent. I'm not white. And so if you press on my skin, it doesn't turn pink because that's just not my melanin. So her tool is a spectroscopy tool. So it really is a race agnostic. So Illuminate has what we call remote monitoring portfolio elements of it too also. So we have a cardiac monitoring using personal devices, which basically does an image analysis of your face as a background process in your iPad or your phone or whatever, your mobile device. And it's running continuously. So it can detect whether you're going into arrhythmia. And particularly for like older people and such as it running in a background process, it can send a little concerning note like, hey, you're having a problem here. Can you please get it taken care of? Or send a message to your caregiver, your family member, someone like, my mother uses her phone all the time and she has arrhythmia. And so it would be helpful if one of the children was pinged if there's a problem going on so we can go get her the care she needs. Think Biosolution is placed in many different care facilities right now, and they are remote care for elderly patients. They started out with a very fancy, phenomenal sensor, which you would wear and it would help you get your workout just right because they measured all different aspects of your cardiac health through this sensor, this wearable sensor that you'd wear, and it would tell you your blood pressure and your oxygenation, all these things for athletes. But when COVID hit, they started paying attention to the overpowered sensor and just really a basic sensor and a software utensil that allows nursing homes remote care for elderly patients. So they could do this monitoring, not for athletes, but for elderly people and unwell people without having them come into the facility. And it brought to attention a very important thing. Sometimes the uncoolest stuff can make you a lot of money. So it wasn't the fancy sensor. Well, they needed the sensor. It was really the software app. And I mentioned Rubetection here also because it also gives people the ability to have a non-medical professional send you data, which helps in care of patients. This is a quick look at the VPG Health Cam, the one that tells you if you have arrhythmia, but it's a nice application for somebody to monitor someone remotely. And this is a look at what the COVID-19 monitoring platform for Think Biosolutions is. They used it for COVID-19. It's usable for any kind of cardiac issue or even other issues. So it can go to an assisted living facility or to a home, and the data can go to both a home and a hospital clinic. So it gives you an early warning score, which lets if the patient's like my parents and they're elderly, lets me know my mom or dad needs some assistance and go do something. And also let their caregiver know to go take care of this patient. And in the communications and security area, we have Sonor, which is a Li-Fi, IoT, and underwater communications company. They do this. They use Li-Fi and IoT specifically for oil and gas. And I want you to think about free space communication for just a second. We're all very satellite dependent. In the event of some satellite disaster, be it naturally occurring or man-made, most of our planet's covered in water. So underwater communications really becomes more and more critical. They are deployed in the oil and gas region and off of Saudi, but one can imagine that it could be used anywhere. We have two different companies working in quantum in similar areas, but not exactly the same. Heikian out of India does an on-demand quantum entropy device, which is really suitable for things like pharma, where you want to track, you want to uniquely track a pharmaceutical product, and you need to make sure that it's well encrypted and easily trackable. So you're using a very specific uniqueness of the image to allow this kind of tracking, as opposed to a random number generator. And I'll talk about that in a second. Standard random number generators, as the industry knows them now, they're not random. And consequently, they're really not as secure as one might think. So Heikian in pharma uses this on-demand quantum entropy feature. Axion Technologies does an actual random number generator based on Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It is not like a seeded algorithm, which most random number generators are. They're seeded, but the minute you're seeding an algorithm, it's not random. So Axion goes after security-based technologies such as finance and other industries. And flying through this, but I'm hoping that you have questions at the end. In the manufacturing and metrology section, we have a couple of different investments. One is Layer Metrics, and they enable a reliable metal additive manufacturing with precision measurements and optical inspection systems. And it captures every single critical data point in every layer in real time, which is very critical with 3D printing applications, especially volume 3D printing applications. Another portfolio member is Momentum Optics. Momentum Optics is a very disruptive manufacturing technology. It enables rapid fabrication of technically very challenging optics, and it's much faster. It's 5 times faster in production and 10 times lower in cost than ordering it from your typical methods. And it's really critical in research, in early stage, in prototyping, and in supply chain critical industries. You want to be able to rapidly make things. You may not make them in high volume, but you need to be able to have access to them. And this is a supply chain issue, which is becoming more and more critical. So I've shared with you a bunch of different technologies that we have invested in, of the 50 something that we have, and all of them are optics based, and everyone is going in a different direction. But I wanted you to get that sense of all that you can do with optics. So by recruiting and growing key companies, I'm saying in this region, we strengthen the industry, grow the quality of employment in our industry, and ensure the longevity of optics and photonics companies. And that's really what we're after. We are a not-for-profit, and we are optics people trying to really help the industry grow. We are supported by Empire State Development and Governor Hochul and NextCorps. Luminate was created and administered by NextCorps, which is a not-for-profit that helps tech companies grow. If you're interested in what we do, or eventually participating, or have a cool idea for a startup, follow us. You can subscribe to Luminate's, I didn't need to do that, Luminate's newsletter if you want to get updates at luminate.org. Again, we are a not-for-profit. We're just here to educate. So I'm going to stop sharing.